Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for Remnant TV, coming to you from a very windy rooftop here in Rome, where the Clerical Sex Abuse of Minors Summit continues to clamber down one rabbit hole after another. This was the scene today in the Vatican press office.
Delia Gallagher from CNN. Cardinal O'Malley, Cardinal Soup. In 2002, the U.S. cardinals, your brother cardinals, were over here under John Paul II. I was here, many of the people in this room were here, and the American people were watching on television. And at that time, the reassuring face of this crisis, that crisis and the continuing crisis, was Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. On Saturday, dismissed from the priesthood and was an abuser himself, talking about zero tolerance, talking about cover-up would never happen again in the United States. How do you, amongst yourselves, cardinals, how are you holding each other accountable outside of the norms now? And how do you ensure the American people that what happened with your brother cardinals in 2002 is now going to change? In other words, that they can believe what you're now saying. Thank you.
You want to start?
Now, of course, CNN's Delia Gallagher asked the question that everyone wants answered, everyone except those running this summit meeting. And I think CNN is aware as anyone else that Cardinal Soup was just 2 years ago passing out the Spirit of Francis Award to Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. And for a reminder, we'll play it one more time because it's so crucial. Check it out.
The recognition of Cardinal McCarrick for his tireless effort in helping the Church. At Manhattan's Metropolitan Club, Archbishop and newly elected Cardinal Blaise Cupich presents Cardinal McCarrick with the Spirit of Francis Award.
Now, even if Cardinal Cupich was unaware, I don't know how this could possibly be the case, but even if he was unaware of Cardinal McCarrick's problems, everyone else was aware of it, maybe he wasn't. Let's give him that benefit of the doubt. But still, why would the Vatican choose this man to head up this summit, knowing that YouTube is teeming with videos of him handing out awards to Cardinal McCarrick? It simply makes no sense. No wonder Cardinal Cupich lost his red hat today at the press conference. The thing suddenly just disappeared. It was there one moment, it was gone the next. And it struck me that that's a fairly good analogy for this whole thing. Maybe some of these men should think about stepping down if this is the best that they can do. Because as heavenly signs go, that was almost as good as the fact that the Vatican evidently, 5 months ago, lost track of the liturgical calendar and didn't realize they were scheduling this summit to land on the feast of St. Peter Damian, one of the fiercest opponents of clerical sodomy in the history of the Church. I guess that feast day was missed by the Church of Accompaniment gang, but it certainly was not missed by Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who sent a letter to the summit yesterday pointing out the obvious. He said, quote, "We cannot avoid seeing as a sign of providence that you, Pope Francis, and brother bishops representing the entire Church have come together on the very day on which we celebrate the memory of St. Peter Damian." I'm not sure if anyone here would even care. Maybe they wouldn't even know who St. Peter Damian was. At this point, nothing would surprise me. They seem very busy here this week, coming up with a comedy of errors, with one buzzword after another. I must have heard the word synodality 100 times over the past couple of days. And they talk about radical listening, and they're emphasizing lay witness. But it's almost in a way that they're kissing up to the press by saying, we think lay people should come and help. Well, they're the ones in charge, and they've been in charge all along. And so they talk about collegiality now morphing into synodality, and of course they talk about accompaniment and ownership and all these buzzwords. What are they getting at?
The theme of ownership, and that's why transparency is important. Transparency is about that ongoing communication to make sure that everyone has a voice and is able to understand what's going on in a very transparent way. Vision, which is important because we need to remind ourselves who we are, and that will give us a pathway, set us on a trajectory.
Do they really think that's going to work? Synodality over and over again, as though the press, as though the world and the Church are as impressed with their new little orientation of the Catholic Church as they are. I got the feeling today the press doesn't even know what they're talking about on some of these things. And the other thing that they really wanted to stress, these bishops, they went into this with a game plan. And it was all about what I would consider a form of exploitation, again, of the victims of clerical sexual abuse. Because they go on and on about how now they're going to be listening. They call it radical listening to the victims, now that they're here in Rome to present their stories. And that simply listening to these victims are going to send these bishops home changed men. Now I ask you, does that resonate with you? Does that seem like a good plan with anyone out there? That these bishops needed to come all the way to Rome to listen to victims of clerical sexual abuse, to finally grasp how terrible sexual abuse is? This is 2019. And they don't know, they didn't realize apparently how sexual abuse of children destroys their lives, how many of these victims never recover, how many of them turn to drugs, many of them end up killing themselves in suicide. These are grown men asking us to believe this, asking us to believe that they didn't quite realize how bad it was until they heard the testimony of the sexual abuse victims this week here in Rome. But wait a minute. Back in 2002, these bishops were gushing sympathy for the victims, remember?
We have a lot of challenges. Our work isn't done. But thank God we are where we are today. We're in a much better place than we were 10 months ago. And these norms are an exceedingly significant step for us to take as a conference. Thank you.
We must move forward. We must put an end to this. We cannot have Dallas 2 and Dallas 3 and Dallas 4.
They said they were radically listening then, too. They said they were changed men in 2002 as well. The victims were all trotted out then, too. And the bishops told the world in Dallas that they felt the pain of the victims and that they were never going to let this happen again. And now they're saying the very same thing here in Rome. That's their game plan. That's all they got. Same stuff, same line, same cockamamie line. Because evidently they have nothing else. They certainly are not going to touch on homosexuality, on the sexual corruption of the priesthood. Can't do that. Politically incorrect. So now they're trotting out the same sort of hand caught in the cookie jar penitence. We're so sorry. We hope we know it'll never happen again because now we've heard the testimony of the victims. Do they take us for fools? Cardinal Bernard Law, back in Dallas and on many other occasions, he said too that this would never happen again. And shortly after that, he was sent right here to Rome. He was given a beautiful Renaissance villa so that he wouldn't have to face prosecution, I guess, back in the States for having covered up for who knows how many cases of sexual abuse. And now it's Cardinal Soup. He's brought out now to tell us how sorry he is and how he owns this. Today he told us he's a baptized Catholic, he's a very good man, and it's going to be different with him than it was in the past. And again, the fact that he handed out awards just 2 years ago to Cardinal McCarrick makes that a little bit hard to believe.
We do it in a way that wants to draw attention to the work of the church that goes to the periphery, goes to the margins of society and in the church. Cardinal McCarrick has been an individual who's done that his whole life,
Everyone knew about Cardinal McCarrick. Everyone. And now here in Rome, they've gathered together to have sort of a victims group, like a therapy session. And they actually think that's going to do it, that's enough. They're blubbering, they're crying about the survivors of sexual abuse and how much they care, these bishops. Well, that's nice. And thank God that they do, but let's just be honest here. If Archbishop Vigano, whom Francis has now called the great accuser for having blown the whistle on these guys, on these monsters, if he had never come forward, would they be so worried about the plight of the victims this week in Rome? Would any of us even be here? And yet he's not even invited. He's not here. His testimony isn't being heard. He's the one that knows what's really going on. But instead of considering his testimony, we're hearing about radical listening and synodality and the church of accompaniment. It's insane, folks. But this time, it's going to be different. This time they're going to be good little bishops and they're going to go home changed men. After all, now they're listening to the victims. Were they not listening to the victims before? You know what? Something strikes me, based just on that claim, that the testimony of the abuse survivors was some great revelation to them. Based on this, I think you could make a case that they should be stepping down, these bishops. I mean, think about it. This is child abuse of a little child. And these are grown men. And if they didn't know the gravity of sexual abuse until now, in 2019, until they heard from these poor victims, until they heard this heart-wrenching testimony this week, then I would say these bishops are too out of touch with reality to be entrusted to handle this worldwide, monumental, universal crisis. And on the other hand, if they did know of the horrific consequences of sexual abuse and how could they not have known, then they're just making stuff up again over here, aren't they? Exactly as they were doing back in 2002. This is just one big, pardon me, CYA operation. And by the way, these are priests, first and foremost. These are ministers to the soul. Their job is to get people to heaven. We haven't heard anything about that this week. Not one word. Not one word about contrition to Almighty God. They keep telling us how sorry they are for the victims, and that's wonderful. A little late, but wonderful, I guess, if it's true. But what about God? Where's the apology to Him, whom they're supposed to represent here on earth? They have overseen the destruction of His church. They have driven countless souls away from the path of salvation. They've made victims of all of us, in a way, because all of us are ready to walk away from the mess that they've created here. It's not just those who were physically or sexually violated. We've all been violated. And God has been violated. But not one word from these priests. Not one word about having offended God by sitting back and letting the bride of Christ get raped in front of the whole world and then covering it up. They're priests, not project managers. Their job should be, what they should be talking about this week is radically reforming the training of priests in a different way, down a different path. They should be talking about screening seminary candidates in a different way. They know as well as we know that back in the days, not that long ago, if a man had a pornography addiction, he was not considered fit for the priesthood. He was not allowed to gain entry to the seminary, just for pornography. And now these guys are telling us that homosexuality isn't a hindrance. It's not an impediment. That homosexuality in the priesthood has nothing to do with abuse. Nothing. Really. Let's think about that for a moment and then I'll close. Imagine, if you would, that your priest next Sunday comes into the pulpit of your church, stands up and proudly says, I am a heterosexual. I am a proud heterosexual. Personally, that would strike me as someone who's so imbalanced, I would grab my children and walk out of his mass. Priests, let's recall, are sworn to celibacy, to chastity, right? So once we discover that our priest is fixated on his own sexuality, we've got a problem. I don't want to hear about Father's heterosexuality, and I certainly don't want to hear about his homosexuality. And if a priest wants the world to know that he's a homosexual, he's proud and out, we've got a huge problem because he's fixated on sexuality, right? And he's supposed to be celibate and chaste. That's not supposed to be what's defining him anymore. That's not supposed to be his orientation as a knight of Our Lady, as a servant of the altar of God. But again, not one word about that pink elephant of homosexuality in the priesthood, the gay profession, the subculture of homosexuality. Not one word here in Rome. No, friends, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. It's a sham. Nobody's buying it. Not us, not the press, not the people in the press. I had some good conversations today with people from CNN and other places who feel they sound like traditionalists. The victims aren't buying this. They're all up and down the streets of Rome protesting because they're not buying this. Again, this seems like a sham to us. Maybe it was accidental. Maybe they really are just completely incompetent. I don't know. But it's ridiculous. And the Vatican at this point doesn't seem to have a lot of friends left. Every single adult in the room knows that they're just playing games over here again, just as they did in Dallas 2002. That back then it was McCarrick who was leading the show, the dog and pony show. Now it's Blaise Supich, Cardinal Marks, who spoke today, whose press conference we just left, in fact. Archbishop Scicluna, who is the guy that denounced the good Catholics in Malta who tried to mount something of a public defense against gay marriage in that country. He came down on them like a ton of bricks. So when you put polarizing figures like this in charge of a summit meeting on sexual abuse like this, is it any wonder why the press, the victims, yes, the traditional Catholics here, are all smelling the same rat here in Rome this week? It's got one more day to prove itself, but at this point, it seems like they're sticking the finger in everyone's eye, and it's disgusting. I'm Michael Matt for Run to TV. We'll see you tomorrow for the wrap-up here in Rome.